Let's get started. We are beginning today a two-part series in honor of Chanukah. Today's shir will be about, as you can see by the title, more of a hashkafa focus. And then Emir Tashem, next week we'll have a overview of a lot of the halachos of candles in Chanukah generally, and obviously with specific eye towards women's obligation and some of the practical issues that come up. But for today's shir, I want to do actually, as you see in the source sheet, I broke it down into three different and distinct points, each of which I think are beautiful and perhaps even in theory could have been elaborated on into a shir in itself. But I thought I would share three specific points, all of which I think come together to encapsulate what I call the inner beauty of Chanukah. That is to say, perhaps issues that we don't always appreciate, in that sense they're inner, but I think if we take a step back and probe a little deeper, we'll find some really beautiful and meaningful ideas which can not only be hopefully interesting and stimulating intellectually, but just as importantly, inspire us and enrich our Chanukah experience. I was actually looking, it's not something I included in this year, but in preparation for this year, I was reading an essay from Rav Soloveitchik, and he pointed out something very interesting. I never thought of this. And he said, in life, it's based on a comment of the Zohar, but it's really just an astute observation. You really need mazel, and very often the success or the popularity of something or someone is not necessarily in proportion to the merits. And you have certain people who are very successful, and other people could be just as talented or bright and aren't have the same success. But it's also true in the religious sphere. Why is this shul more popular than the other? They're just as, a lot of things are out of our control. So he made the point that Yom Tovim, Chagim also need mazel. And there are certain holidays which had mazel. It says Chanukah has had mazel. We know it's true today, and he pointed out, he remembers, he has talked about his memories of early 20th century Europe when he was a little kid, and even when he was a little bit older before he emigrated to America, that Chanukah, perhaps only rivaled by the Pesach Seder, is one of those mitzvahs, at least candles, in some form or another. And I'm not discussing if you and I would always consider what every Jew lights to be perfectly halachic, but that's irrelevant for this purpose. Chanukah is unbelievably popular in the sense of the percentage of Jews who observe it or commemorate it, even on any level, is far higher than they would in almost any other mitzvah. Certainly other holidays. There are holidays that Jews have never even heard of that are in the Torah. But Chanukah, for whatever the reason, proximity to other calendar dates, it doesn't matter. That's the point. It had, so to speak, a mazel. Chanukah is something, but just because everyone does it, doesn't mean we truly understand or appreciate it. Moreover, an anecdote which I often like to quote, kind of introducing Chanukah or these type of shiurim, which to me was very, very fascinating. There used to be, I don't know if it's still so popular, but it used to be very, very popular, something called the comic clown. It'd be shows, kind of a la Broadway type shows, but the entire performance would be a single person dressed up in some kind of a clown costume who would act out something which would not only be entertaining, but back when high culture was somewhat actually high culture, it was intended to be profound and thought-provoking. And if I remember correctly, I think his name was Hume Cronin. He was the most famous clown of his day. And one of his most famous performances was he'd come out onto the stage and there'd be a spotlight on him. And then he would, kind of act out in a way that was clear, when you were looking at him, that he lost his keys. And then, at the other end of the stage, is a spotlight on an empty space. And he spends a few minutes looking around, this space, which is probably as big as this table, obviously not finding the key. Eventually, after, it seemed like forever, it was probably 5 minutes, a policeman comes out. He says to him, "What's wrong? Is there something I can do to help you?" He says, "Yes, I've lost my keys. I cannot find them." He says, "Oh," pointing to the spot where the light is focused, is this where you lost them? He said, "I don't think so. I'm not sure." "Well, then why are you looking here?" "Because this is where the light is." That's the show. To me, it always resonated with this phenomenon of Chanukah, which is to say, there's an instinct that people have, and it's not limited to Jews, it's universal. There's an instinct to be attracted to the light. Light is good, light is uplifting, darkness is bad, it's blah, right? It's a known phenomenon, certain levels of depression, even with a lowercase d, when the clock changes, all of a sudden, 4 o'clock, it's dark out, you're exhausted, it's just a different, right? we're attracted instinctively and naturally to the light. But that doesn't mean that we actually know what we're looking for. Right? We don't want to be somebody who just is attracted to the light but doesn't know where the keys are. Right? It's not good enough to just... So we instinctively, and I think of this in light of that observation I mentioned from Soloveitchik. People, Jews of all stripes, we're instinctively attracted to Chanukah. We're attracted to the light. There's something beautiful and uplifting. But if we don't really understand what Chanukah is about, then we're basically like a clown looking in the wrong place for his keys. It's not enough to just have a gut instinct that there's something good here, the light. I want to go to the light. We need to understand what is the message of Hanukkah, or at least some of the messages, to truly understand, I would say, maybe not with bar car keys, but keys for life. And therefore, again, out of endless possibilities, I, as your faithful hero, have narrowed it down to 3. So at least it's manageable for us. But there are many ideas, of course, we could have shared, but I'd like to share 3 specific and distinct ideas. I think you'll appreciate all of them. And at the very least, I hope you can at least take one of them with you and at some point share it with your family. So the first one I've entitled, Appreciating the Miracle of Nature, or I could have just as easily entitled, Everyday Life. Perhaps the most famous question regarding the holiday of Hanukkah, arguably one of the most famous questions in all of halachic literature, is the question at the top of your page. The source is the Beis Yosef, that's Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he asks a fundamental question that goes to the heart of everything you learned in kindergarten. That is to say, top of the page, Lama Kavu Shmoni Yamim. Why is the holiday of Hanukkah 8 days? Why is it 8 days? Because there's a miracle. Candles stay lit 8 days. We're actually going to see in the continuation of the year, we'll actually see the Gemara inside. So he says, well, 1 second, if you think about it, it's actually, someone's not good at math or doesn't appreciate what's going on. Kaven de shemen shebepach hayabo kadei lahadlik laila achas v'nimsa shlonasa nes ela b'sheva leilos. We know there was enough oil to light for 1 day. So the miracle was that it lasted for 8. So 8 minus 1, higher mathematics, is 7. The miracle was 7 days. It wasn't a miracle of the first day. That was how much oil they had. The miracle was that 1 jug of oil, which had enough to last 1 day, it actually lasted 8. So we should have a holiday. It should be a 7-day holiday. Now, everyone's already getting nervous. You're going to take away my 8th day. The kids especially, vacation, right? But it's a really profound and obvious question. I do not exaggerate when I tell you that a number of years ago in the library in Yeshiva, I saw a sefer that was entitled 400 Answers to the Beis Yosef's Question. And I'm quite sure that at this point there are more than 400 answers to this question. As I say, it's the most famous question, maybe in history of halacha, certainly of Chanukah. The Beis Yosef himself, actually, who no one ever talks about anything but his question, he actually gives 3 answers, all of which are very sharp, very plausible. They're just not like inspiring. But he gives 3 very practical answers. The first thing he says is very simple. These were, smart Kohanim. They knew what they were doing. They had taken maybe a home econ class or something. They said, we have to budget. And therefore, they didn't pour the whole jug in the first night. They only poured 1/8 in. They poured a fraction because they knew it's going to take 8 days to come back from Tekoa where they were making the oil. So even though they only put in enough for, let's say, 3 hours, it actually remained lit for an entire day. So already on the first day, there was a miracle. There was actually oil getting put in each day, says the Beis Yosef, but they were only putting in a teeny amount. But instead of only being lit for 3 hours a day, the candle was lit for a whole day. That's his first answer. On the second line, he gives the Odiyeh Shlomer, he gives the second answer. They poured in all the oil, but miraculously, the jug stayed full. And the next day, they poured in all the oil, and the jug stays full. So in fact, there was 8 days of miracles. That's his second answer. And his third answer, on the last line, he says that it wasn't that the jug stayed full, it was that in the menorah itself, even though they had poured in all the oil, the fire's being burned, the candles remain lit, but the oil's not getting consumed. The oil stayed down, didn't get consumed. So he figures out 3 different ways. Each one of them are very plausible, very practical, very pragmatic. 3 different ways you can envision that, in fact, there was a miracle that was already happening on the first day, and therefore it was an 8-day miracle. And the good news is, what they told you in Gan is actually still correct, that yes, there was an 8-day miracle, and that's why we have an 8-day holiday. Okay, that's his answer. three answers, I guess. But as I mentioned, there are many, many more. And I want to share with you what, at least to me, I haven't seen all 400. I don't want to misrepresent myself, but I've seen many of them over the years. What to me is the most powerful and inspiring answer. And I have to say, years ago, I had seen this idea in the name of one of the great Musar masters, the Alter of Kelm, one of the great students of Yisrael Salanter. I couldn't track it down. I have some of the Alter of Kelm's farm in my house, but I wasn't able to find it. It turns out, without necessarily quoting it, because great ideas are often thought of by more than one person, that in a contemporary sefer, a beautiful set of the Hashkafa essays by one of the great Gedolim of our day, Rav Asher Weiss, he actually on his own says the same idea that years and years ago I saw from the Alter of Kelm. So I'll give you, we'll see what Rav Asher Weiss himself says in a minute, but Rav Asher actually doesn't just say the same thing as I remember from the Alter of Kelm. He actually uses two of the primary sources as building blocks to answer that question. And I want to start with the second source on your sheet, which is a famous Ramban. This is the Ramban in the end of Parshas Bo, the last Ramban in Parshas Bo. And he asks another, this is I hope I'm not getting too repetitive or cliche, but he asks another super important and super very well-known and famous question, which is, how come Jews seem to have an obsession with Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's not just 8 days a year on Pesach that we commemorate Yetzias Mitzrayim. There are so many things that we mention, sometimes it's in the Psukim, sometimes it's even in the language of our davening or our brachos, where we mention Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, which ostensibly seem to have no connection whatsoever to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Tefillin and mezuzah and shop, all sorts of different things. What do those things have to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim? They only happened in Nisan. It was talking about Egyptians. There's no connection. Why do we constantly bring up Yetzias Mitzrayim? That's the Ramban's question. And his answer, it's a long piece, but the bottom line, and we'll see the particular part inside that's relevant for us in a second, but his basic point is that there is something about Pesach and Yetzias Mitzrayim that is not just yet another miracle that we commemorate, but specifically Yetzias Mitzrayim more than anything else confirms the basic foundations of our emunah. Our entire emunah, he says, rests on the foundation of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, I will admit, by the way, this is not something that would work when I say emunah. This won't work in Eish HaTorah or in Tzeswai Shabbaton, meaning it's circular. If you don't believe in the history of Yetzias Mitzrayim, then this won't help. But if you believe that the events actually occurred the way they're described, which is a leap of faith for someone who may not be brought up religious, but if you would believe that, then the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, as we have it traditionally, confirms the basic tenets of our emunah. Specifically, not only the existence of Hashem, but the fact that Hashem knows what's going on in the world, that He cares about what's going on in the world, that He interjects Himself in the world, that there's a reward and punishment. All of those things are latent and inherent in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Well, one of those major foundations that he talks about that comes up in Yetzias Mitzrayim has to do with the ability of Hashem to interact in the world. Now, how did Hashem interact in the world in Yetzias Mitzrayim, in the whole story of Pesach? Miraculously. Rivers turning to blood, hail coming down with fire, and all sorts of things. And then, of course, not least of which was splitting the Yam Suf. Okay? So, in that vein, take a look at the second source on your sheet. Says the Ramban, there are so many mitzvos that mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, even though they're not Pesach related. Why? Hakol lios lonu b'chol hadoros idus b'movsim shlo yishtachu lo yu poschen pel kofer lahakish emunas elokim. So that's the main point I mentioned, that the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the most intense, concrete confirmation of the tenets of our faith. If you accept, again, you have to accept the historicity of the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, but if you do, then all the basic principles of our faith get confirmed. Now, he then discusses the idea of miracles, which we all understand. That's the incredible thunder and light show of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Makos, etc. And then he says something which is incredibly profound, and again, at the risk of repeating myself or sounding cliche, very well known, very famous, because it is so important. Says the Ramban, it's true that we experienced miracles in the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, but that's only one type of miracle. That's not the only way Hashem interacts in the world. Umin hanisim hagedolim v'hameforsamim adamoda b'nisim hanistarim shehem yesod haTorah kula. Now this may be a terminology and a dichotomy that you're familiar with, and you may have heard this before, but it actually all comes from the Ramban. Ramban lived a long time ago, so there have been many people since then who have been influenced by this Ramban who will say similar things. What is the Ramban saying in that one little sentence? that when we talk about miracles, we really mean two different things. There are two forms, two types of miracles. What he refers to in this context is Nisim HaMufarsamim, the famous ones, the big ones, he says Mitzrayim, or in other contexts he calls a Nes Nigla, a revealed miracle. Hashem swoops in, changes the laws of nature, and wow. It says the Raman, there's another thing called Nisim Nistarim. Not Hashem breaking the laws of nature, but the laws of nature themselves. The very fact that the world works in an orderly way, all of that comes from Hashem. It is no less miraculous. It's more than that, though. So that typology, and if you've ever heard that phrase, a hidden miracle, Nes Nister, it comes from this Ramban. But it's more than that. Of the two types of miracles, Ramban is putting, if you forgive the expression, he's putting all of his chips in the middle of the table. He doubles down. So it's not just that I'm claiming there's two types of miracles. Of the two, he says, which are the most important? Not the thunder and light show. Not the things that get all the headlines. Right? It's the fine print where the good stuff is. The everyday Nisim Nistarim, that's the main thing. Again, let's repeat that phrase I just read before, inside, the first underlined part. Umin hanisam hagadolim hamafarsanim animodim menisim hanistarim. Sheheim. It's the hidden miracles which are yesod of Torah Kula. Again, it's great that X, Y, and Z times in history Hashem did these crazy miracles for us. It's great. We appreciate that. But that's not a foundation for life. A foundation for life is the type of stuff that happens in life, in everyday life, in every one of our lives. And those are the Nisim Nistarim. So if they're so important, why did Hashem, X amount of times in history, swoop down and split the Yam Suf or do other such things? This is a complete paradigm shift from the way we're used to thinking. So Ramad, he only did those every now and then just to make sure we know that the fact that your car started, or when you had to pull off to the side of the road, actually someone stopped to help you, or you went to the doctor and you heard good news, or whatever the things are, all those little things, your kid finally listened and picked up his clothes. It's a miracle! All of those things are from Hashem to get us thinking. The Yam Suf is so you realize that was from Hashem. Not from the Yam Suf from Hashem. That's not so important. Hashem could have taken us on out another way. He didn't need to do that. He could have made it a financial crisis and Paro just, let us go, or who knows. He could have done 100 things. He did that so that we reorient ourselves and see Hashem in everything. It's the main thing's not Yam Suf. The main thing is that you woke up today and you're healthy. The main thing is that the sun rises. The main thing is that the grass grows. That's the main thing. That's the Yisod in Torah Kula. She'ein la'adam, now he's very extreme here. Ein la'adam chelik b'Toras Moshe Rabbeinu, achenamin b'chol devareinu, u'mekareinu, shekulam nisim, ein behem teva, u'minag shalolam. Now he doesn't mean there's no such thing as nature. Right? The Ramban, he's not as well known as a man of science of his day the way the Rambam was. The Ramban was also a doctor. The Ramban was very sophisticated in the science of his day. I don't think they understood everything we understand, obviously, but he understood. He's not saying that there's no nature. What he's saying is that what you have to believe, and if you don't believe this, he's basically calling you a heretic, a kofar. We have to believe that Hashem is the author of the laws of nature. If you would see Chas v'Shalom, the laws of nature, as independent of Hashem, so that's heresy, that's kfirah. But he's not denying to our laws of nature. Again, I don't know if he knew what gravity was, but he intuited that there were laws of nature. He understood the sun rises and the sun sets. He understood that. But it all comes from Hashem. If Hashem is the author of the laws of nature, you know what an author can also do? If the author wants, he can change the laws. The coder can go back in, right? You and I don't know how to change the code. We're sharing this particular program we're using. It's always got the same bugs. It's annoying us. So we can complain. We can switch to another company. But the coder, the programmer, can go behind, go in the back and change it. The author can change it. You can read a book and just find the ending was a little lame. The ending is disappointing. But if you were the author, you can actually rewrite it. So once you acknowledge that Hashem is the author of nature, then Hashem can also edit and change nature. That's the Yetzias Mitzrayim moments. But that's not the key. The key is that Hashem wrote everything, even the small parts. Okay, this is incredible. This is a very, very famous idea of the Ramban. And the truth of the matter is, there's a very powerful Gemara, which I think illustrates this in a very, very meaningful way, which is the next source on your sheet. It's the Gemara Tainis Tav Chaf Hey. It talks about Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. Among all the Tanaim, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is in a very short list of people that the Gemara itself extols his miraculous powers. This is a many stories in the Gemara of the miraculous powers of Rav Chanina ben Dosa. So in the context of these stories about him, they tell the story in Daf Chavheir and Tainis of Chad Bei Shimshei, an Erev Shabbos, Chazia Labarte Tehavis Atziva. He's a good father. And he notices, he's not just running around for Shabbos. I'm not as good a father, because my kids know, and my wife, everyone knows for many years, I was just became a shul on Fridays, you don't bother Abba unless it's an emergency. I'm in the bunker downstairs in my office preparing the shurim, etc., etc. I wouldn't notice. But Rav Chanina was a better father than me. He noticed his daughter was sad. Daughter was sad. Okay? So he says, Biti, Lamai Atzit, why are you upset? What's wrong? So she tells him, Kli shel chometz nechalef li b'kli shel shemen nidlakti mimenu or l'Shabbos. I made a mistake. I was filling up the candles, and instead of pouring in the oil, and now we would say the paraffin or whatever, by accident I poured in the vinegar. Maybe the candle will give me up a little bit of a flame, something, but I'm not going to have, it's not, vinegar is not flammable, it's not going to work. I'm not going to have beautiful Shabbos candles of Shabbos. I messed up. And now she's very, very sad. So he responds, second line. BT, ma ichbat lach. Why do you care? What does it matter if it was vinegar or oil? Mi she'amar l'shemen v'yidlok. Hu yomar l'chometz v'yidlok. The same one, the Rebbeinu Shalom, who said that usually oil is flammable. So for you, we'll say the vinegar is flammable. Now, because he's Rav Chanina ben Dosa, sure enough, the Gemara continues and says, Hayadolek v'holek kol yom kulam. Not only did it light, but in fact, instead of lasting for a few hours and, by the time you finish benching or the candles go out, the candles stay lit, a la Chanukah, an entire day until Havdalah, the Shabbos candles, the Friday night candles were still lit. Okay? Because Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa could do miracles. He could be the shaliach of that. But the key, of course, is that underlying part. It's a paradigm shift. Why do you think that vinegar remaining lit for Shabbos candles for a day, why is it any more miraculous than oil? You tell, what is the difference? There's only, now I'm elaborating and clear what the Gemara means. There's only one difference. 1,000 times in our life we've seen oil be flammable, and we've never seen vinegar. But that's it. If we were to see vinegar 1,000 times, then that would be normal. The fact that we never saw such a thing, and now it happened. Right? Why? It is the same thing. Why is splitting the Yam Suf a greater miracle than the sun rising? Or than any other law of nature we take for granted? I'm not even such a biology expert, but you just read even a little bit how the eye works. How any decision you make, the millions of things have to go right in a millisecond. Why is that any less of a miracle than pick your miracle? The only answer is because the sun rises every day, the sun sets every night, so we're used to it. If we had never seen it before, we'd be talking about it the way we talk about it. You see, that's right. So says Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa's daughter, you think that it's not a miracle when oil lights. Why is it not a miracle? So to put Ramban's language in, what he's saying is, every time the oil lights, that's what's called an Eis Nistar. Because Hashem built that into nature. So if Hashem wants, and B'schuti, He's going to change it today for you. I wouldn't recommend, doing that to see if you or your husband or your father is, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. It doesn't work for everybody. But conceptually, it's the same idea. Now, we could go on and on about this, but I just want to bring it back to where we started so we can move on to the next point. And I think it's a really, really profound idea, which is a high madrega. I don't know how many of us, myself included, go through every day and can really keep this in the front of our mind. But there are people who, frankly, do live lives like this. And I have to say, inevitably people are going to listen to this online that don't live in Eretz Yisrael, so they'll forgive me, but you find much more of the people who live their lives like this living here. It's much, much harder to live your life this way in Chutz La'aretz. Now that I've lived here, I know it's not so easy to always see it here either, especially if you go to the post office. Good in Hemel. That's a proof that there's a Satan. And there's Gehenim on this world. I haven't gone to the post office in at least 7 or 8 years because of this. So, whatever you're sending me isn't worth it. Unless it's $1 million, I'm not going. It's just not worth it. There's no present, there's no Amazon thing. If they're not delivering, I'm not going. Anyway, so it's not necessarily easy always here, but there's no question. I remember even before we made Aliyah, I would come back I used to lead trips from my shul in Baltimore to Israel, and I would, either with my family and my wife, or sometimes in the shul, I would talk about it. And after a number of years, I realized the one thing I repeated every year when I would talk about my trip would be the amazing people I met, and how they live with Emunah, like Hashem is just part of their life. So it's not easy. I don't think it's necessarily easy for any of us, but it does exist, and it can be done. And even if we're only doing it X amount of the day, not every day, it's still better than nothing. But to be able to realize that everything we have is from Hashem. So how does this relate to Chanukah? So take a look at the last source in this first section, Rav Asher Weiss, Minchas Asher. It says, now you understand why we have an 8-day holiday. And he gives the example of the Ramban and the Gemara that I just mentioned, and let's read the underlying part. Umargishim anu, she'ein bein hayom harishon liyom hashmini v'lo klum. Mishamar l'shemen v'yadlok, can also same thing for the, for what Yom Echad. Yomar l'shemen v'yadlok, shmoni yamim. Says Rav Ashwas, you know why it's an 8-day holiday? Not the way the Beis Yosef came up with all these different things. They only used this amount of oil, or they put in all the oil, the jug was empty, and at the end of the day there was no oil left in the menorah. And yet it kept on burning. But that's a 7-day miracle. It was natural for one day. It's only a 7-day miracle. So why do we have an 8-day holiday? Says Rosh Weiss, because we're thanking Hashem for the first day too. Chanukah is the holiday of the recognition, not only of the Nes Nigla of the 7 days, it's a recognition of the Nes Nister of the first day. The Chiddush of Chanukah isn't the 8th day, it's the first day. We celebrate even on the first day as a reminder, as an acknowledgement, as a statement to ourselves, to our children, to our families, and hopefully to the world, Pirsumei Nisa, that the first day is just as big a miracle as the other 7. Who said that oil should light? Why should it work? Hashem said. He created the laws of nature. Wow! Nes means Hashem did it. It's just a synonym. Hashem did that too. That's no less a miracle than the other 7 days. That's why we have an 8-day holiday. Mishum kach madlikim anu shmona yamim. Yom echad kineged hanisim hanistarim. Shiva yamim nosafim kineged hayamim ha-forsamim. 1 day for the hidden miracle, and then the other 7 days corresponding to the more public miracles. Yes, it's true. Of course it was more public when you have no oil left and the candles are burning. Of course. But we also have a first day of Chanukah to remind us of the Nisim Nisar. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2. The majesty of the Jewish home. So if you take a look at the Gemara, this is the famous Gemara, Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, in Shabbos. What is the mitzvah of the Ner? Tana Rabbanan, and mitzvah Chanukah, Ner Ishu Beso. Before going on to the other parts of the mitzvah, which we'll get to later in the shir, the basic mitzvah of Chanukah, as everyone knows, and no one has ever done, I assume, but we all know, we've learned this before, the basic mitzvah, you see it, this is in the Gemara, Chazal, when they made the holiday of Chanukah, because you want to fulfill the mitzvah, doesn't matter what night of Chanukah, doesn't matter how many people in the house, 1 candle. Every night, nacha candle, nacha candle, nacha candle. At the end of the holiday, 8 candles. I live alone, 8 candles. I have a family of 10, 8 candles. That's all you need. 1 candle per family, per night, period. Okay? Of course, we do more because there's a hitter mitzvah, which we'll get to in the third part of this year. But isn't it striking? Not just that that's the mitzvah. Chazal could have done anything. Why did they pick 8, 1? We'll get to that. But it's not the one part that's fascinating. How did the Gemara formulate it? It didn't say you need 1 for ner ish ubeso. There's already a kind of an emphasis on the home. Now, you could say that's just a practical or a pragmatic thing, but it's interesting. If you take a look at the next source, the Rambam picks up on this as well. Kamaneros hu madlik b'Chanukah, mitzvah shia kol bayis ubayis madlik ner echad. There's a focus on the home, on the home, on the home. And those of us who learned together a month or two ago the laws of Chanukah candles, we had 2 shiurim on Shabbos candles. So you recall, I think it was on the first, we had a 2-part series on Shabbos candles. I think it was the first shiur. I mentioned the following question. When a woman lights Shabbos candles, is she lighting on behalf of the home? And therefore, automatically, memela, anyone who happens to live in the home is fulfilling the mitzvah. Like a mezuzah. Or is it no? Every person, you, your husband, your children, and every individual has a mitzvah. But just like the husband makes kiddush and is motzi everybody, the mom lights candles as motzi everybody. Do you have to be motzi your family members in candles? Or it's just that, no, the house needs candles, and now they have them. Or is it that each of us have to do a mitzvah, but you'll do it for me? So we asked that question regarding Shabbos candles, and basically we talked about the different possibilities and nafkaminas, but that's the issue which is very famously comes up in Chanukah. Right? Mezuzah, right? There's no mitzvah for me to put on mezuzah and my wife to put on mezuzah and my adult children to put on mezuzah. Okay, but since I'm going to put it up, they were yotzei. No, that's not the mitzvah of mezuzah. There's no mitzvah on every individual to have a mezuzah. The home needs a mezuzah. So a number of achronim point out, based on this Gemara, this Rambam, and other sources, that it sounds like that's what the Gemara is saying when it comes to Chanukah. That the main, it's true, there's a Mahadran, and all of us and the kids, everyone likes their own menorah. But the core mitzvah, the original core mitzvah of Chanukah, it wasn't just 1 versus 8. It was a bias versus gava. Is it on the person? Everyone's going to like their own menorah? I'm sorry for those of you who are more mdukta. Chanukah. If you know this about Israelis, are very hypersensitive. You can't say a menorah. This is a menorah. Lights a menorah. What we light is a Chanukah. You have never experienced that rude Israeli. Right? The first year we lived in Israel, me and my wife were scholars residents in a pretty Anglo community in Yerushalayim. All the shiurim were in English, and I spoke I think 3 times. That all went fine. But my wife, they wanted to know, my wife should give a share to the women. So Shabbos afternoon, she's giving a share. And I don't know what she's talking about. It was Shabbos Chanukah. She's doing some kind of Chanukah share. And within the opening sentence, she's nervous. She doesn't usually do this kind of thing. Anyway, she says something about, you like the menorah. And some woman screams out, it's a Chanukah! Oh my gosh. Wow. If I had been there. It's good I wasn't there. Anyway, people have to be like that. Okay, anyway. I'm getting over it. So, in case you know anyone who might be sensitive to this, a few Olim Chadashim even in the room, you should be aware. There's a certain percentage of people who are very hypersensitive. It's a Chanukah. Okay. Anyway, the menorah. Okay, I'm Jewish. I call it a menorah. So, the menorah, it's not just about how many candles are in the menorah. It seems like there's an emphasis of Chazal, at least in the basic core mitzvah, it's a mitzvah on the home. On the bias. Now, why should that have been? So one theory is, I didn't give you this in the sources, but one theory is that it is a midah k'neged midah. It was a response to the gezeros of the Greeks. We have from various sources that they prohibited certain specific mitzvos, maybe bris milah, kiddush hachodesh, things like that. But we have sources, in fact the Rambam quotes this in a letter, but we have it from sources even earlier than the Rambam, that one of the gezeros that the Greeks made was the Jewish people couldn't close their doors. Whether it was for tznius, or they don't want us, surreptitiously doing mitzvos in private. We know that, unlike the Purim story, Chanukah is the story of religious persecution. We're happy to let us live. We had to ditch Judaism. And they understood which were the key cornerstones. So certain mitzvahs like Milo, or maybe a Jewish calendar, you can't have Jewish life without that. But it also seems clear, based on these sources, that they understood that the foundation of Jewish life is the Jewish home and the Jewish family. We're not some amorphous amalgam, the Jewish people. We're lots of Jewish families. The building block of the Jewish people is the Jewish family and the Jewish home. If you can compromise that, Memela, all the other Humpty Dumplys will fall and never be able to put back together. And therefore, the Greeks, often our enemies know us better than we know ourselves. They attacked the Jewish home, the Jewish family. And thank God when we were successful, when we commemorate the holiday, Chazal said, Ner ish ubeso, called bias the bias. The focus is on the home. I think that is a very, very profound point that is often not appreciated. Unfortunately, some of the people who do their best to make us not appreciate it are the yeshivas. Because the message many of our children get is that the yeshiva is the central part of life. And this comes up with many, many nafkamina, sometimes between tensions between yeshivas and families and in myriads of different ways. It pains me, and I think it's a mistake on the yeshiva's part. Not taking away from the importance of yeshiva or education, to acknowledge that at the end of the day it's a Gemara, blah, blah, blah. Don't get me on a rant about education now, but they're makoros. This is not just something I dreamed up. Our mechanchem, our teachers, our yeshivas, they are the representatives of the parents. Now, this is not just a pro-parenting thing. It's also, you don't get a free pass. There are so many people who have just given over their parenting responsibilities to the teachers. They're just extensions of you, but they're not instead of you, and they're still not more important than you. The parents and the home are the foundation of everything. Okay, we understand. We're not all experts in Chumash, let alone Gemara. We don't always have the time. Yes, there's a reason that already from the time of Rishu ben Gamla, there is an educational system which we're proud of. But it has to be not only seen in partnership, and sometimes, unfortunately, there's tension between homes and schools. But so that's the first tragedy. But even when everything's great, your kid's happy in school, you love the school, it's all great. We have halal by all of us, for all of our children. But you should never forget, the primary education, the primary responsibility is not the Rebbe. It's you. It's bias or bias. It's about the Jewish family. And I saw, last night I was looking through, I couldn't resist because he's so beautiful characteristically, but Jonathan Sachs. Slightly different emphasis, but he also discusses this. And he makes something very, very beautiful. I even gave you the URL if you want to go see it online. You can find it. He addresses this by introducing a slightly different angle, which is the comments that I have in the Rambam, in the second to last source on the page. And that is, I'll paraphrase it now, but it's really an amazing Rambam. The Rambam, in one of the only places in all of his halachic writings, the Rambam refers to Chanukah candles, mitzvah sner Chanukah, mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. It's a precious and beloved mitzvah. We have a custom in our house whenever we have guests, especially guests who don't know each other. There are people in this room who've been recently in our house. So you know the minhag in the Gottlieb house. We make the guests all go around the table after Hamotzi and they have to tell us a few things about themselves, one of which is, what is your favorite chag? Okay? And no surprise, lots of people say Chanukah. It seems like more people say Purim, but that's a different discussion, especially yeshiva guys. But anyway, or people who work with yeshiva guys. I won't go into any more details. But turns out, if you ask the Rambam, it sounds like his favorite holiday is Chanukah. It doesn't say that about Rosh Hashanah. Mitzvah Chanukah is chaviva ad me'od, and the Rambam puts his money where his mouth is. He doesn't just say, I love it. My mom would give me presents when I was a kid. I love dreidel and the good food and donuts. Says the Rambam, I'll tell you what that means. Let's say Nebuch, a person has so little money, they could only spend money on wine for Kiddush or money for the candles. Says the Rambam, candles come first. Candles come first. Because that's how important Chanukah is. Now, not only that, Nebuch. What's worse than that? You know what's worse than that? What's more desperate than that? I don't have enough money for a shirt on my back or a candle. In almost every area of halacha, the answer would be, of course, I can't buy tefillin and put food on the table, but don't buy tefillin, put food on the table, that comes first. Shockingly, the Rambam says, Chanukah is an exception. Afilu min glima de alt katfei, even if you have to sell the shirt off your back, Nebuch, you're so poor, that's how important Chanukah is, chaviva ad me'od. Now, with all of that background, it's chaviva, it's more important than Kiddush, even more important than a shirt on your back. Now, this is the Rambam, a third scenario. You only have enough money for Shabbos candles or Chanukah candles. It's Friday night, Shabbos, Chanukah. I'm so poor, Nebuch only can do one. Shabbos candles, Chanukah candles. Now, it doesn't say anything about chaviva ad me'od for Shabbos candles. I would have expected it. It can beat Kiddush. It should be able to beat Shabbos licht as well. But says the Rambam, no. I'll just read the underlined part there. Ner beso, Shabbos candles comes even before Chanukah candles. Kodem. Why? Mishum shalom beso. We talked about this a little bit when we did our series on Shabbos candles. One of the themes of Shabbos candles is shalom bayis. There should be light in the house. It should be a pleasant environment, an uplifting environment. Not only so you don't stub your toe, which could definitely ruin a Shabbos, but what kind of conversation, what kind of environment is there if you can't see your husband, you can't see your wife, you can't see your kids? You know, it's a bad environment. We want it to be an uplifting environment. That's what Shabbos candles represents. Connect with each other, connect with the Shabbos, take a breath, enjoy each other's company. You can't do that without the light. So that's what Shabbos is about. Says the Rambam, as important as Chanukah is, Chaviva Abod. Shalom Bayis is more important. So with that background, Rabbi Sachs, is shocked by this. How could it be? Why is it that Shabbos candles is so important, even more than Chanukah candles? So look at his take. We'll look at the bottom of the page, turning over to the next one. Consider, Chanukah commemorates one of the greatest military victories of Jewish history. Yet Jewish law rules that if we can only light one candle, the Shabbos takes precedence. Because in Judaism, the greatest military victory takes second place to peace in the home. Again, it sounds obvious maybe, but it's actually of shocking and profound importance. The Shabbos candle, Shalom Bayis, is more important even than celebrating this incredible victory. Rabbim biad me'atim. Why did Judaism alone among civilizations of the ancient world survive? Because it valued the home more than the battlefield, marriage more than military grandeur, and children more than generals. Peace in the home mattered to our ancestors more than the greatest military victory. As he says in the final paragraph, peace between husband and wife is above the highest glory on the battlefield. In Judaism, the light of peace takes precedent over the light of war. So again, he's not exactly saying the same thing I was saying, but I think it's basically the same idea, and it's certainly complementary and consistent. The home, and of course, if the home is the basis of Judaism, what's the basis of the home? Husband and wife. And that is the foundation upon which the rest of the family will be built. So the focus on the home is so important. Again, I mentioned previously, and again, I don't regret mentioning it, but I don't want it to distract us. It's not just a question of yeshiva versus home and who's responsible for education, although again, I think that is an important point that people sometimes they rent out the responsibility of their children, and they forget that they're also responsible. It's not just the Rabbi who, not going to see your child again after next year. It's you who are going to be with them forever. But it's more than that. It's in terms of prioritizing and organizing our own lives. It's easy, especially for people who work in the professional world, to lose track, for good reasons, innocent, well-meaning reasons, to lose track of what's really, really important. Again, you can say it, but at the end of the day, quantity time is more important than quality time. Now, quality time is something that people made up because dads weren't around. He's never around, but at least he's there for quality time. Right? It is better than nothing, but only barely. Prioritizing our families means prioritizing our families. Recognizing that there's simply nothing and I would say this as much to men as to women, please, you can quote me on this. There's nothing that any man or woman can do with their lives that is more important than what you do with your children. It is the single most important thing that any one of us can do. That doesn't mean that it's not important to be successful in other things. Of course it's important to do good things in your life outside the house too. But it's not more important. And that is true for men and for women. The greatest accomplishment in our lives, the most important task that we were all given, if we've been blessed with children, is our families. And Chanukah is the holiday of families. Ner, Ish, Ubeso. We remember from kids, and Chazal tells us about the millions of followers that Avram and Sarah had. What happened to them? We don't really know. What we do know is Ki b'Yitzchak Yikar l'Chazara. The legacy of Avram wasn't the million. It was the one. It was Yitzchak. That is our truest legacy, religiously and in every other way. The bias is the most important thing. It is our ultimate responsibility. How to do it, different kids, different challenges. Some kids are harder. Of course, I'm not trying to oversimplify. I'm quite aware of how complicated this is. And everyone has their unique situation, and I get it. But at least we have to understand what the headline is. And the headline is that there is nothing more important. And one of the messages, not the only, but one of the very important messages of Chanukah is to reorient ourselves and to remind us that Ner Ishu Beso. And as important as that is, Shalom Bayis is even more important than that. Because at the end of the day, the bias is the key to everything. Last but not least, let's turn to our third point, which is a particular favorite of mine because I like the idea, but also because I get to quote my Rabbi, Rabbi Rosenzweig, for this. If you take a look, if you go back even to the first side of the page, I'm going to try to go a little quicker now so we don't go over too much time, but that famous Gemara that we started with in section number 2, where the Gemara told us that the basic mitzvah is 1 candle per night. Of course, none of us do that. Why? Because the Gemara continued and said, Mahadrin ner l'kol echad. What's Mahadrin? How do you do Hiddur Mitzvah on Chanukah? We still only light 1 candle a night. But now, instead of just the dad lighting, everyone in the family lights their own menorah. Okay? But then the Gemara says there's a third level. Mahadrin and Mina Mahadrin. What's that? This is a famous machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Do we start off with 8 candles a night, count down to 1, Beis Shammai's opinion, or do we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 till 8, which is Beis Hillel's opinion? And the Gemara at the end of that source has different theories as to what the rationale would be. Why do Beis Shammai say this? Why does Beis Hillel say that? But the most well-known is the Gemara gives the last word there is, why does Beis Hillel say you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up? The Malin B'Kodesh, the aim we're reading. We should always be on a growth trajectory. Up, 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 up. Malin B'Kodesh, going up in Kedusha. We don't want to start big and slowly dwindle. We want to build up to the crescendo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We want to be in a growth trajectory. Now, if you think about it for a second, this is really an anomaly. It's a halachic unicorn. I'm not aware of any other area in halacha where we have a tripartite, different levels. We have mitzvah and hiddur mitzvah. But for the Gemara to be giving me 3 different levels, mahadrin min mahadrin, in contemporary Israel, they've decided that in the world of kashrus, we're going to adopt this idea. Mahadrin min mahadrin. Oh, you only do mahadrin, I do mahadrin min mahadrin. Right? Okay, but that is, as we know, not one of the best parts about living in Israel. Okay? But in actual, real halacha, only time. Not just some general hiddur mitzvahs, zakeli van vehu, that's true about everything. Have nice Shabbos candles, have nice tefillin, But in Chanukah, we have the Gemara itself telling us what is the hiddur, and then it's not enough to do hiddur. Hiddur, mahadrin, min mahadrin. Why is that? Why dafka in Chanukah do we have that? We don't have that really in anything else. Moreover, if you take a look at the next, if you turn back now to the back of the page, you see those 2 sources, the Pnei Yoshua and the Beis Halevi, 2 of the great Achronim. They both asked the following question. We started off this year by saying, why is it an 8-day holiday? It should only be a 1-day holiday. They have a better question. They really go after the Ganenet. Why is there a holiday at all? Is it because there was a miracle? Says the Beis Halevi, and even before him the Pnei Yoshua, why did we need a miracle? Why? Didn't you go to Gan? Why do you need a miracle? They only had 1 jug of pure oil. It took 7 days to go back and forth from Tekoa. That was 8 days. So they said, yeah, but you know what they didn't teach you? Who said you can't light with impure oil? Who told you that? Ordinarily, you're not supposed to use impure oil in the Beis HaMikdash. That's to do anything that's tamei in the Beis HaMikdash. That we do know, of course. But there's a rule called Tuma, Hutra, B'tzibor. In certain extreme situations, for example, where a majority of the Jewish people are tamei, which was certainly the case at the time of the Chanukah story, then in fact, not for your private carbon, this wouldn't allow you to bring your personal carbon hoda, carbon chatas or toda, but for communal carbonot, like the carbon tamid or the menorah, which is on behalf of the Jewish people, in an extreme exigent circumstances where everyone's tamei anyway, there's a halacha. You're allowed to do it for tumah. Tumah, hutra, b'tzibur. This was a miracle that was unnecessary. They could have lit from the thousands of tamei jugs for those 8 days, and eventually they would have gotten tar oil. Of course, we want to get tar oil. Seder, so it'll take us a week. So for a week, we'll rely on the halacha, tumah, hutra, b'tzibur. Why did we need a miracle? So before I answer that question, a second question, which is, you see the last Gemara on the page, also from the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, a very, very famous Gemara, where the Gemara in two words basically seems to be asking the question of our shir. My Chanukah. What is the holiday of Chanukah? What is the purpose of the holiday of Chanukah? What are we commemorating? So the Gemara answers and tells us that on the 25th of Kislev, first it tells us what the halachos are. What do you do? Okay, you light the candles, you don't have any hespedim, and you can't fast. But then, at the end of the first line there, the Gemara tells us, right? The Greeks came in, Timu kol hashmanim, and then eventually the Chashmonaim were victorious, and they fought back, and they batku umatzu, they couldn't find it except for Pach Echad Shel Shemen, which had the Chosem of the Kohen Gadol, and they could have only lasted for 1 day. Nasa Nes, it was a miracle. They lived from it, and it stayed 8 days. The Shana Hacheret, the next year, wow, they said, this is the anniversary of that miracle that took place last year in Kislev. Kavum v'osum yamim tovim b'hal v'hoda. The Gemara asks, why do we have Chanukah? And what's the answer? Because of the Nes of the Pach Shemen. Many, many Mefarshim ask. You seem to have forgotten half the story. Maybe even the main part of the story, which is, what about the miracle of the victory? Here it's barely a footnote. We mentioned the victory only to explain how they got to the base of Mikdash to get the oil. But it's all about the oil. Interestingly, in Al Hanisim, which we say in benching and davening, that's all about the military victory. Rabbad Matim, etc. Tmeim Biat Vahorim. We don't mention the oil there. What is the real story of Chanukah? The military victory, which was miraculous in its own way, religious freedom, something that everyone benefited from, or this one little miracle, which is taking place cloistered, only a few Kohanim even knew about at the time, which we now learn wasn't even necessary because they could have lit impure oil. Why is the Gemara seem to be so focused on that menorah? So I think that the answer to both of these questions, which I've seen in many sources, and again, there's enough material to develop this as its own shiur, but for this, we'll let Rav Rosenzweig speak, so to speak, for himself. Maybe I'll help him a little bit. And this is from a shiur. I heard this Baal Peh from him in great depth, Kedarko, numerous times. And about 15 years ago, he wrote this up for a very, very wonderful website called TorahWeb.org. You can find the longer version of the Star Torah there. And he basically makes the point. We'll read a little bit inside together. It is conceivable that the menorah miracle emerged as a central figure and symbol of Chanukah. Again, that's the question. Why are we focusing so much on the menorah, this little esoteric, unnecessary miracle? Why not on the big, incredible miracle of the victory? Precisely because it was not technically indispensable. Right? It's a paradox. That's because we didn't need the miracle. That's why we focus on it. As many people point out, Chanukah was it was a religious battle, right? So they weren't trying to kill us, it was religious extinction. The Chashmonaim, their revolt, rejected the very notion of, classic of Rosenzweig language, institutionalized spiritual mediocrity. The Yevanim were smart. They didn't say right away, no Judaism. But what they did say is, you can have a mediocre Judaism. You can have a compromise Jewish life. And as Rosenzweig develops, it's not just like intuitive or common sense. Halacha itself allows for various compromises, especially when you're dealing with an implacable enemy who might be threatening your life. A lot of things allow you to compromise on halacha, to prioritize other things, especially your life. But that's when it's isolated, po v'sham. I can live my frum life, but now Nebuch, my daughter, fell off her bike and she really seems to be bleeding. I have to take an ambulance to the hospital on Shabbos. So that's a compromise. I'm saying something comes before Shabbos. Yes, that's allowed. And there can be other myriads of examples. That's when it's isolated. But what about when they say, no, not today or for this shaila, I want you to compromise. I want your life to be one of compromise. That we can't compromise on, says Rav Rosenzweig. That's exactly what the revolt of the Chashmonaim were. It wasn't because they were going to kill us. They weren't going to kill us. And each one of the things, you can't have bris milah or we'll kill you. Of course, the halach is pikuach nefesh is docho. So why would they have a revolt over that? Kiddush HaChodesh is so important, you have to give up your life for that? They won't let us close the door. That's what we have to give up our life for? To fight the Greeks? We were fighting the superpower of his day. The answer is not because of the individual mitzvos, because they wanted the Jews to live a life of mediocrity. And that is something that we cannot accept. The nation cannot acquiesce to the decrees against the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvos, because such acquiescence would have undermined the very foundation of the Jewish existence, even if it might have temporarily secured the physical continuity of the nation. Or as he says a little bit later, the whole premise of the holiday is the realization that Jewish life cannot long survive without the idealism and ambition of a life of mitzvos. Yes, there are individual times where we can compromise, but when applied pervasively to justify a comprehensive and systemic breakdown of halachic life, such a policy of compromise would condemn Klal Yisrael to spiritual oblivion. In other words, what he's saying is, yes, it's true that when they got to that moment, those Kohanim could have compromised. They could have relied on a heter. It exists. It's on the books. It's mutter. Rabbi, tell me, is it mutter or not? Is there a heter? Yes, there's a heter. You can use impure oil in this case. So why didn't they rely on that? Why did Hashem make a miracle? The answer is because the whole revolt was so that they didn't have to compromise. That we should have a life of Jewish compromise. Now when they finally are successful, what's the first thing we're going to do? Compromise? The whole revolt was so that we don't have to live a compromised life, but a life of, what Rosenzweig likes to call, religious maximalism, or what I called religious aspiration. If you spend your life just saying, but Rabbi, is there a heter? The answer is there may be. But then you're writing yourself into oblivion. A person who lives their lives, and let alone if an enemy would try to make the whole Jewish people live our lives, just based on where is there a heter, where is there a compromise, that is not a Jewish life. That is not a Torah life. Each of us at our own speed, and the hider or the well, he's calling maximalism, I'm calling aspiration. What's good for you or for your family is not necessarily good for you or your family. That's another classic mistake of our generation. We paint with very broad brushes, and one size is supposed to fit everybody. Massive. The levels of casualties of children because of that mentality are way too many to list. But whatever the right way of aspiration, it has to be, as I say, a growth trajectory. Slow, steady, in these areas, that areas, those are details. Important details, but details. But it has to be a life of religious aspiration. That is the essence, as Rose of the holiday of Chanukah. They could have lived a compromised Jewish life. Right? Okay, I don't know what would have happened 100 years later, but at the moment at least that they rebelled against the Greeks, they could have avoided the whole thing. They could have been keeping, 600 plus of the mitzvos, kept their lives, would have been fine. But it would have been a life of compromise. And once you take out aspiration and the desire for growth, you've begun the death process, you just don't know it. Right? If you cut out the roots, it may take a few days for the plant to die, but it's already dying. The roots of a Jewish neshama are striving, are growing, are trying to be better. Again, just think about it in almost any other area. It could be lahavdil in the job area, right? Once you take away the ability to grow, to look, to aspire, to be better, you're just punching a clock. It's like the Walking Dead. It's certainly true for neshamas as well. And that is the holiday of Chanukah. That's why, as important as the military victory was, but that doesn't encapsulate I'll say it in this way, and I don't mean Chas Hashem to denigrate either of them. The military victory of Chanukah is not any more unique than the 6-Day War or some other military victory in Jewish history. Those are miracles which we thank Hashem for. We thank Hashem for the 6-Day War miracle, and we thank Hashem for the military victory in Chanukah. But that's not unique to Chanukah, says Rav Rosenzweig. What makes Chanukah unique was the menorah, in the sense of it represents, the war represented Jewish physical survival. But the menorah miracle represented the miracle of Jewish aspiration and maximalization. Now I'm just going to I want to read one thing for you, and this will conclude. What is the quote for you? Okay, I'm sorry, one second. Okay, good. Go to the Pnei Yoshua. Again, I said he's one of the people who had asked, why was there a miracle at all? They could have just relied on the Tamei oil. Says the Pnei Yoshua so beautifully. Again, he basically makes this idea. Rav Rosenzweig is amplifying these earlier sources in his own beautiful, inimitable way. But the Pnei Yoshua basically says, yes, the Jewish people did not want to rely on the B'di'evet of the Tamei oil, and Hashem gave them a miracle. Why? L'chei nira, first line of the Pnei Yoshua. L'chei nira, d'ikra hanes. Why did Hashem make a miracle? Why didn't Hashem just say, deal with the Tamei oil? Lo nas ela lahudia lehem chibas hamakom alehem. It's a totally powerful way of looking at it. The miracle of the candles was a kiss from Hashem. It was a sign of affection. It was a delicious hug, a kiss from Hashem. It was a sign of His love. You're willing to go to war. You're willing to fight, not to survive, but to live a life of spiritual aspiration and that. We went first. We said, I love you first. It's the hardest place to be. People know it's the hardest to be the guy. Okay? To go first. Okay? We did that by fighting against the Greeks, saying we're not going to settle. We don't want to live a life of, here and now we can compromise, but a life of compromise? That's not a relationship we want with Hashem. That was so inspiring, says the Pnei Yoshua. He reciprocated. An os shel chiba, a hug, a kiss from Hashem, was that miracle. So yes, you are willing to do that. So therefore, that's why Mahadran is such an important part of Chanukah. It's built in. And you don't know anyone, unless they're in a tank, or who knows where, and they have no candles, whoever in their whole life heard somebody lighting one candle. How is it? How come like in everything else in Judaism, some people spend this on an estrog, and some people get the Mahadran estrog, and these people do this for their kashrus, and how come in Chanukah we're all Mahadran and Mahadran Jews? Because that's built into our DNA. The whole miracle was for the Mahadrim and the Mahadrim. Okay, Chazal said, in case you're nebuch in a crazy situation, you light one candle. But who keeps that? There's nobody does that. Because we all understand that the whole holiday is about Mahadrim, about religious aspiration and maximizing our religious connection to Hashem. So here are three, I think each one of them very, very powerful ideas. We spoke about the idea of Nes Nistar, seeing Hashem in everyday life. We spoke about the foundation of Judaism being the home. And now we spoke about the idea of religious aspiration and maximalism. And I hope, it's crazy, but we're actually not that far away from Chanukah. It's coming. And I hope that each of these ideas, or at least one of them, can enrich your Chanukah. And as I say, I hope you share this with your families and enrich their lives as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.